You look exhausted. Are you getting enough sleep?
There's usually someone here in the fort with a story to tell, a contract to offer. Ask around. Never know what you might learn.
Waiting on a few reports just now.
Afternoon. Or night.
What have you been up to?
You'll love it. Okay, it's called the Manifold. Well, technically I call it the Manifold.
And it does what, exactly?
For years, I'd heard of a type of Shaper relic that was able to amplify and augment the qualities of other objects. Never encountered one, never knew anyone that had, but thanks to the Elysian manuscript, I think I know where one is. Right here, in Bastion.
And you think it'll amplify and augment the power of my javelin?
Precisely. Excited yet? Not to worry. Once we find the Manifold and get it working, you will be. Guaranteed. First, the Manifold. Then, we boost your javelin. You silence the Heart of Rage, and boom. Everyone lives happily ever after.
It's a little more complicated than that.
Details. I've sent all the particulars of the location to Faye. I can't wait. Hey.
patching in our contact from Corvus.
Good, sir. I see you're not one for briefings.
I like to learn on the go.
Can't fault you there. Name's Sev. Corvus has assigned me to counter Scar activity around Fort Tarsus.
Since when does Corvus care about scars?
Since they started making acidic weapons to attack supply caravans.
That's a good reason.
We think this is where they're making the acid.
Any idea how?
I want you to find that out and put a stop to it.
Found the relic.
Scars have done something to it. It's gone volatile.
For those of us who don't speak Shaper, that's bad, right?
Obviously. Freelancer, you will need to silence the relic.
Well, look who's back.
Cats can run faster, but foxes can run longer. If he ran, he could head her off before she reached her minions at the outpost. Well, he did love a good chase. always a rush.
Oh, they really ought to put a railing on this thing, he thought.
Leonardo, smash! not have felt a little better. He was closing on her. He could smell her fear. He tried not to think about the interrogators at the secret base. What they'd do to her. Maybe it didn't have to end that way. Maybe he could talk to her. But, after all, there were worse things the Imperials had done to friends of his. It did not matter how outnumbered. Where the rebellion was, the secret Zenobia held could level the playing field. Codes, passwords. She could wreak havoc with just a few whispers to a far speaker. You couldn't go sticking jewels in your gauntlet just anywhere. What if you dropped one and broke it? Luckily, there was a bench right here. Bernardo reached the outpost. The Imperials there were no match for him. Soon after, Zenobia limped up the path. When she realized he was already in front of her, she didn't even try to run. "Oh, you left without saying goodbye." Again, he said, "Please, I'm enjoying this a little too much," she said, shaken. "Oh, spare us the chit-chat, would you?" said Lapino as he shackled her hands so she couldn't throw spells. "She knows all his plans." All the way back to the Farfarer, Lapino nagged Renato about how the interrogators would pry all the intel out of Zenobia. How that would turn the tides in the imminent battle. All they had to do was take her to the rebels' secret base. Renato didn't like to think about what the interrogators would do to her. Couldn't he just talk to her? As they reached the ruins, Renato could see ravens everywhere, searching for the rebel base. They'd have to hide the Farfarer or go on foot. "What if we get separated?" asked Lapino, for once thinking ahead. "I'll show you a map to the base," Renato told Lapino. "Renato, don't do this," said Zenobia. "We were friends once. We..." "Shut it, witch, or I'll shackle your mouth too," said Lapino. And then, a few moments later, they touched down. As Lapino pulled Zenobia off the Farfarer, Renato readied himself for the battle ahead. "I'm sorry I nicked your jacket," she said. "It's just... it's stupid, but it smelled like you." "What?" he said, confused. "Then... why didn't you ride? Why didn't you far speak?" "Oh, save the romantic nostalgia. Let's go!" shrieked Lapino. So Renato launched himself down the path to the secret base. A doctor once told Renata that fruit was a placebo. But he felt better, and that was what was important. It wasn't his fault. They looked so breakable. Alas, they had to bury him in a bucket. Actually, several buckets. Hey, didn't I just kill your brother? Renato had misgivings. It had been Lapino's idea to capture Zenobia. Lapino who'd guessed she'd run to the outpost. There was something wrong with the way none of Lapino's plans had gone wrong yet. It wasn't like him. I need more materials, thought Renato. What was really fun was hooking yourself onto a moving ship. His sword food teacher used to say power gems were cheating. What a stupid old fart. You couldn't hack this kind of firewall. You had to warm it up to you. Magical jewel. Bernardo couldn't wait to find a workbench. They caught their breath. It's beautiful, she said, looking at the ruins. This used to be the library of Ubar, he said, before your father's ravens smashed it. Do we have to talk politics? She asked. That's not how I want to remember you, she said with an odd, wistful look at her face. She was as beautiful as she'd ever been, and as brave. Peppino huffed. They got back on the trail. Good thing Renato didn't have vertigo.
Renato checked to make sure his sword was still working. Yep.
Who are you looking at? Oh, right. No one. The long stairs. So he was close to the rebel base. Nothing was on fire. So far, so good. Ice walls only let you through if they knew you were cool. Stay away from the other guy's sword, you know? As they made their way to the secret rebel base, Renato felt strange. Zenobia was his prisoner, yet somehow she felt more like an old friend. He wanted to tell her all his secrets, but suddenly the ruins lit up with thousands of fireworks. There was a thunderous roar and dust rose. The caves were collapsing. The caves? You've been playing me? Renato said, and he stared at Zenobia. I'm sorry, she said, and she seemed almost embarrassed. Then, everything went dark. When Renato came to, he had a terrible headache. Also, Zenobia's sword was at his throat. And her shackles were gone. So was Lupino. The terrible thing is, he said, I really have missed you. Now that we've destroyed the rebellion, would you consider becoming an advisor to the Emperor's daughter? I'm no one's servant. Everybody serves. Even if it's only destiny. I like to choose my own destinies, he said. The whole point of a destiny is you can't choose. Oh, never mind, she said. Look, if I see you again, I'll have to kill you. He watched her ship soar away. He would see her again, he decided. Even if he had to fight his way across the entire fleet. The Imperial fleet was cleaning up the few rebel remnants. For only a moment, he thought about running. But heroes don't run, even when the world is against them. Even when their cause is hopeless, and their efforts futile, and pointless, and useless, and death painful and guaranteed. He's decided to stop thinking for a while. Ooh, what's there? Renado's arm was sore, his armor wet with raven blood. He was tired of death. But death was not yet tired of him. The rebels were losing. Badly. In some other universe, Renado thought, he and Zenobia had left sword school together, taken other names and sailed off into the mists. But not this Zenobia, and not him. For him, there was nothing to do but forge ahead. Kill the Emperor and end this.
There was an inscription on the platform. Balaleka lessons with an address.
Soon he'd confront the Emperor. Again. This time, he'd make an end of it. He'd screwed up last time, but he had a good feeling about this time. At last, he reached the Emperor's ship. Zenobia was there. "Why'd you have to come back?" She said, "Guess I'm just serving my destiny." He shrugged. "You don't even know what that word means." She said, "Do you ever wonder if things have been different all the time?" She said, and drew her sword. In the end, Renado lay bleeding out on the deck. Zenobia sat by his side, upset. "What are you so upset about?" he asked. "You wouldn't understand. Why didn't you tell me you were going to leave school? I was afraid you'd convince me not to." "I guess I'll have to buy you a drink in the halls of the Valiant then," he told her, and then he was gone. And he hadn't learned anything new this time. He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome. There would be a way to win. Renado could feel it. He'd have to explore choices he'd never made before he could figure it all out, though. And with that, the book's pages fluttered to the beginning once again. And he fell. The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renato knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong, but he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. On the other hand, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Lapino was no game changer, but could Renato really leave an old friend to the Ravens? Every child knew about the Sky Ripper. The Transcendent Emperor had buried its pieces deep. And then, this Emperor's horrific sacrifices had brought it back to the surface. Renato wasn't exactly sure how to use the legendary weapon. But surely, there must be some way to do it without provoking another catastrophe. Had he, somehow, summoned the long-lost components of the legendary weapon out of the deep places of the Earth? It was more than Renato could fathom. But if he could find a legendary weapon, he would use it. As he set foot on the island, Renato could not help but feel a tinge of guilt. He'd left Lapino behind. He hoped the Mad Rabbit had somehow escaped the Ravens. He hoped they hadn't eaten him. If they had, he hoped they hadn't eaten him alive. Why had he chosen the Sky Ripper? Renato never made plans that required constant vigilance. He was a hero. He didn't think too much. He just went with his gut and hoped it all worked out. The Sky Ripper was a long shot. He'd have to devote himself to it. No side journeys, no rescuing old friends. That was against his nature. Could he stick with it? It would be fun to try out that one. And here was a handy workbench. Well, the eyes have had it. That had been his mistake before, thinking he could win a battle of wills with an ancient evil all by himself. He had to be cleverer than that, or braver, or something.
I could go that way, he thought.
There was blood on this one, so it hadn't saved its owner. Surprisingly unwounded.
Say goodnight, Gracie, said Renato, wondering who Gracie was. Mutiny. Where was a bard when you needed one?
So that's what they meant by a firewall. What unlocks a firewall? A present? For me? There it was. Skyripper's armature. The stuff that dreams are made of. Engineers' dreams, anyway. The device was intricate. No one alive had the skill to make a thing like it. How is it part of a weapon at all? He'd have to ask a scientist. But first, he'd get the second piece. Skyripper had a heart. A core that had come to rest on the next island. Well, there was another island he could reach. Zenobia had just invaded it with her father's Raven battalions. She must be encamped there still. But fighting Zenobia now, that made no sense at all. He'd already sacrificed one friend to get this armature, was it? He didn't need to hurry to face her. She would find him. Asked himself why he changed course to confront Zenobia. He'd no idea. Sometimes he would just do things, and he could never figure out why he'd done them. Usually, they worked out. After all, he was a hero. The truth is, though, he wanted to see her, wasn't it? It had been a dozen years since Swordfu School. He'd followed every rumor about her, every scrap of news. Not that he still loved her. After all, she was his enemy. No, it was solely because, know your enemy. All right, maybe he should stop pretending. He knew exactly how she felt about it. But their love affair always ended with a tragic death. Unless, maybe he could find a way to dodge tragedy. Surely he could, couldn't he? Thought Renato. Ooh, wouldn't his gauntlet look swell with that jewel in it? Renato could feel the burn. Couldn't do worse with Zenobia than he'd done with the core, could he? Didn't your mother tell you it's rude to stare? Snapped Renato, a little smug. Renato wasn't entirely sure how he was going to capture Zenobia. She'd be expecting him. And he didn't have Lapino to cook up a clever plan. Why was it again that he hadn't got the core? Maybe because the results tended to be disastrous. These streets were familiar. The Sword Fu School was closed now, but he had been down that street 1,000 times. He knew that pub. He knew that alley. He knew the alley behind it much too well. No wonder Zenobia had chosen to invade this island herself. Renato slinked through Zenobia's ship, making no sound at all. Where were her guards? Finally, he reached her bedroom. She was curled up on her bed. Oh, he'd forgotten how beautiful she was. How sleek, how soft. He tapped her on the shoulder with his sword. She vanished. And he suddenly noticed he couldn't move except his mouth. In fact, soon he couldn't keep his mouth shut. He told Zenobia everything. Sky River, the Iblistone, even where the secret rebel base was, until he was hoarse. It was some kind of truth spell. A talky truth spell. She called her father by Farspeaker Toad and filled His Majesty in. But why didn't he get the core? Croaked the Farspeaker in something like His Majesty's croak. Because I missed you, darling. Renato grinned. He doesn't even know why, frowned Zenobia. That makes no sense. It's a trap, shouted the Emperor. I'll meet you at the outpost, and I'll bring my interrogators. If Renato came face to face with the Emperor, maybe he could assassinate him. But maybe it would be smarter and safer to turn Zenobia against her father. You're lying, she said. Somehow you're lying. The spell hadn't worn off yet. He had to tell the truth. The trick was in making sure she wouldn't believe it. The core is perfectly safe, he said. And he tried his hardest to sound sincere. So is the Iblistone. In fact, I was trying to get them myself. Fine then, interrogators it is, she said angrily. I gave you a chance. The Emperor's interrogators were not especially gentle, even by weasel standards. Fortunately, Zenobia had locked him in the guest quarters on her ship, and she'd forgotten it had a toilet that, like all skyship toilets, could be vented into the abyss. This was not the sort of slippery fox he wanted to be, but just as they were about to land, he threw the latch, wrinkled his nose, and leapt through the open latrine. It was a short, safe landing. At least this part of the Nexus hadn't changed too much. Zenobia had been taking him to the Imperial outpost. She'd never expect him to go there by himself. Well, maybe she would. You never knew with her. There were stickers all over the platform for really hot lady foxes, with pictures and addresses and everything. traitors! Roared the ravens. Bernardo knew Zenobia, and Zenobia knew him. She'd suspected a trick. Now he'd vanished. She would probably guess that was his plan all along. Perfect. Maybe she wouldn't use the Sky Ripper. At least not without taking it to the scientists at the observatory first. Meanwhile, the Emperor would be coming to the outpost personally. This could be good. Ooh, a workbench. Did he have any jewels he hadn't tried out? He had. Bernardo was face to face with the Emperor's bodyguard. They looked very tough, but the Emperor held them back.
Oh, where's my daughter?
And how would I know that? Bernardo grinned at him.
She lured me here so that you could kill me, didn't she?
Ah, don't be ridiculous, said Bernardo, trying his best to sound convincing. She loves you.
Oh, I knew it. The rabbit told me I couldn't trust her.
The Emperor hopped out the door. His phalanx of bodyguards retreated carefully. Bernardo heard someone call, "Arrest her!" as they left. Well, that's a job well done, thought Bernardo. Now the fleet would be in all sorts of disarray. But maybe he could find her in the mountains. She always used to go to the mountains to hide from the world. Maybe he could even turn her against her father. Or maybe he could reap the benefits of the chaos he had sown. It was time to report to the Rebel Council, and then launch the attack on a divided and very confused Imperial fleet. Bernardo was very proud of himself. He told the Empire everything, but now they didn't believe anything, and it looked like the Emperor didn't trust his daughter anymore either. There were some advantages to having a slippery reputation, weren't there? Bernardo wondered if he'd really fooled the Empire. He guessed he'd know soon enough. If the skies darkened with 1,000 dropships, then he'd know the Empire believed his map at the Rebel base's secret location. They certainly seemed to be looking for it. There were ravens everywhere. But where weren't there ravens these days? Oh, good! And did you run for me nest? Said the lead raven.
Emperor would attack Zenobia. The Ravens, divided into two armies, would slaughter each other. Then the rebellion could just show up and claim victory. The Council would be overjoyed that Renato had given away all their secrets. It was actually very fine weather, except for the occasional shower of ravens. And no one was burning the ruins down with the mighty power of a god's eye. If the Empire believed anything he'd said, they certainly weren't showing it. Odd that they never locked these things. Anyone ever tell you have a lovely eye? No? The long stairs. So he was close to the rebel base. Nothing was on fire. So far, so good. Renato had been the terror of the sandcastles when he was 2. As he told his hilarious adventures to the Rebel Council, he began to realize they weren't laughing. Just staring at him with those big bug eyes.
Zenobia let you escape?
Asked the speaker.
How do we know you're not a double agent?
Then I wouldn't tell you about her at all.
Maybe you're trying to sound like an idiot, so we don't realize how clever you are.
Croaked the speaker. No, I promise you, I really am that much of an idiot. Renato was about to say when a half-dozen Imperial ships began to bomb the base.
He's betrayed us!
Croaked the toads, and Renato decided it would be good to be somewhere else. He boarded the Farfarer and got out of there. The wind ruffled Renato's fur the wrong way. So the rebels thought he was lying too? Because a half-dozen lousy dropships had probably just tripped over the rebel base? Okay, technically he had betrayed its location,
but not willingly. And he'd made up for it, hadn't he?
Then something exploded. A cannon shot. The Farfarer plunged out of the clouds.
The rebels had hit his ship.
As the Farfarer plummeted towards the abyss, he launched himself into the sails of an Imperial ship. The Farfarer was gone. It had been a beautiful ship, and fast. It could do the Kestrel run in 12 furlongs, or so the salesman had told him.
He would show them. He would be the hero of the final battle. They'd know whose side he was on then.
That's what it meant to be a hero. To go on fighting, even when both sides were trying to kill you. It was time for a little exploration. See? Rebels were fighting ravens everywhere, and not a super weapon in sight. No one was summoning giant murder birds out of the clouds. There were no locusts, no rain of fire. Something blew up nearby, and Renato decided it was not time to stop and ponder. Just as well. He liked acting much better than pondering. Imagine getting a horse up in one of these things. It would be cursing through the street. Finally, Renato reached the Emperor's ship, and there he saw a strange sight. Zenobia being led in shackles by Lapino with a squad of ravens. What? Lapino was working with the ravens? Was he some sort of traitor? And the Emperor still thought Zenobia was a traitor. Renato felt oddly bad about that. Should he run down there and rescue her? Oh, but she was the enemy. Then he heard a whistling sound,
He looked straight up and saw a rebel ship. It was dropping rather large bombs. One of them kept getting bigger as it fell. Huh? Oh. He should go back to some of the choices he'd faced before. Maybe there were new paths that had opened up, like those doors he was opening up all over the map that took him to new treasures and around his enemies. But he'd learned another true thing. Lapino was a traitor. Renato had suspected there was something wrong with the Mad Rabbit, but now he knew there was malice behind his goofiness. The book's pages fluttered to the beginning once again, faster than before, and he fell. The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renato knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong, but he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. And also, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Of course, Renato had a pretty strong suspicion that Lapino had betrayed the rebellion, and he had a gut feeling that he needed to use that to his advantage. Renato finally realized that Lapino was a traitor to the cause, and maybe Renato could use that somehow. Renato couldn't quite put his paw on when he'd realized Lapino was working for the Empire. He'd never exactly seen Lapino sending coded messages to the palace, but he was sure. The rabbit had been on too many disastrous missions where he was the only survivor, or where he accidentally missed getting on the boat that went down to the abyss in flames. If Renato could prevent Lapino from getting back to the fleet with all the intelligence he'd probably gathered, it might be worth the trip. How had they come to this? They'd been on so many adventures together. Lapino had talked Renato out of prison at least 4 times, and Renato had rescued Lapino from at least 2 lynch mobs. Felt that the rabbit resented him. Lapino was hilarious because he was so down on himself and everyone else. But behind the laughs, he wasn't a happy camper. Ooh, was this payback? Or did the Empire have his little white tail in a vice? This was way better than being able to shrink down to the size of an ant. What was that all about, anyway?
Ravens were landing everywhere from dropships. He'd better get moving. If they got to Lapino first, the Rabbit would give the Empire all the intelligence he'd been stealing from the Rebellion, and they'd probably give him a medal. He'd have to be very careful about how he played Lapino. By the slightest hint of danger, the mad Rabbit would take off like a rabbit. Bloody and exhausted, Renato finally reached Lapino. The Rabbit was practicing shuffling his favorite deck. Now that he knew what the Rabbit was, there were a few things about him that Renato didn't find so amusing anymore. You sent me an urgent message saying that you're in danger. Oh, I am. The Ravens are coming. Now, I got a clever plan to kidnap Zenobia. Renato wanted to clap shackles on the Rabbit and shout, "You're a traitor, and I'm not falling for it." But if there was one thing Renato was sure of, it was that the core of the Sky River was dangerous mostly to its user. If he could put it in the Emperor's hands, old Isengrim III might blow himself and his fleet up with it. Yes, that was it. Me? A traitor? I'm hurt, said Lapino. Why ever would you say that? We found your code book, said Renato. They hadn't, but he hoped Lapino would blow his cover. You got me, said Lapino. And you know what? I don't regret a thing. It's always about you, isn't it? You're the pretty hero. You get the girl, you get the medal, and what do I get? Rabbit food. I thought you liked rabbit food. Go to hell, said Lapino. And he made a gesture, and 20 ravens came out of nowhere and stabbed Renato to death. He had tried something bold and paid the price for it. How had they come to this? They'd been on so many adventures together. Lapino had talked Renato out of prison at least 4 times, and Renato had rescued Lapino from at least 2 lynch mobs. Dreams may come, he thought. And then he found out. He'd always felt that the Rabbit resented him. Lapino was hilarious because he was so down on himself and everyone else. But behind the laughs, he wasn't a happy camper. Was this payback? Or did the Empire have his little white tail in a vice? Ravens were landing everywhere from dropships. He'd better get moving. If they got to Lapino first, the Rabbit would give the Empire all the intelligence he'd been stealing from the Rebellion, and they'd probably give him a medal. He'd have to be very careful about how he played Lapino. At the slightest hint of danger, the mad rabbit would take off like a rabbit. Bloody and exhausted, Renato finally reached Lapino. The rabbit was practicing shuffling his favorite deck. Now that he knew what the rabbit was, there were a few things about him that Renato didn't find so amusing anymore. You sent me an urgent message saying that you're in danger. Oh, I am. The ravens are coming. Now, I got a clever plan to kidnap Zenobia. Renato wanted to clap shackles on the rabbit and shout, "You're a traitor, and I'm not falling for it." But if there was one thing Renato was sure of, it was that the core of the Sky Ripper was dangerous mostly to its user. If he could put it in the Emperor's hands, old Lysengram III might blow himself and his fleet up with it. Yes, that was it. Renato felt like a real hero, brave and smart. He told the rabbit all about the Sky Ripper's God's Eye core. "I'll go get the core while you attack Zenobia," he told the rabbit. "Oh, wait, I've an even better idea. I'll get the core and you attack Zenobia," said the rabbit. "Right, yeah, that is better," agreed Renato. Perfect. The traitor would make sure the Emperor got the core. Now Renato just needed the Emperor to use the core. If he could only get something that the Emperor wanted very badly. Zenobia. He could save her and bait the Emperor at the same time. Right. Now, all Renato had to do was fight his way through Zenobia's invading troops, sneak onto her ship and into her bedroom, and kidnap her without any of her dozens of guards alerting her. Then, he would rely on her love for him to convince her how evil her father was, so she'd run away with him instead of going back to her father, who was going to blow himself up. It did sound a little risky. But Renato had a feeling it would work out somehow. It always did. Who leaves these chests everywhere? Wondered Renato. I should send him a thank you note. These things really slice like ham. Renato was halfway to Zenobia's encampment when Lapino showed up. He was disheveled and distraught. "They jumped us. I barely got away.
Oh, they got the core. Oh, it was all going according to plan, thought Renato. Now he just needed Zenobia on his side. Yes, that was even better. The Iblis Stone. Zenobia could get it. And then the Emperor would have to pursue them. Wait, no. The gem would corrupt anyone, even her. That's it, he thought. Even Lapino. Even though Lapino was already a traitor. It would turn him against his secret master, the Emperor. He would try to make himself Emperor. And the Emperor would have to defend himself with the core. Boom. He was a super genius. This is terrible, Renato told the rabbit. If only I had gone for the Iblis Stone. But now it's lost in enemy territory. He handed Lapino a map. It gives the bearer so much power. We can only hope the Emperor never finds it. What was that? Said Lapino. I think someone's following us. I didn't hear anything. Rabbit ears. You go on ahead. I'll check it out. And with that, Lapino hopped off with the map. Right, who wants to die first? Renato slinked through Zenobia's ship, making no sound at all. She was curled up on her bed. He'd forgotten how beautiful she was, how sleek, how soft. He tapped her on the shoulder with his sword. She was made of smoke, and he noticed he had a very solid blade to his throat. Did you really think you could capture me? Purred a familiar voice. I just wanted to chat, said Renato. Did you ever wonder why the Emperor adopted you? He needs a sacrifice, someone who truly loves him, to make a bargain with the lost gods. That's a vicious lie. He wants to bring them back. That's crazy. Why would anyone? They could make him immortal, an eater of souls. And with that, her eyes widened. She understood. Renato told her how he had rescued a priest whose order had been massacred, how he had slept in a burnt village. At midnight, the Emperor's victims had come to him in his dreams to tell him of the hideous eldritch rituals they'd been sacrificed in. He could still see those kittens and puppies, their wide, sad eyes, their moist noses. You can't prove that. I've got a witness at the observatory. He couldn't tell her, not yet, why he was really here. He didn't want her to be anywhere near the fleet when her father blew himself and Lapino up. So he told her about how the Emperor's obscene rituals had raised ancient artifacts out of the land. How he'd followed the appalling trail of the hideous horrors His Majesty had perpetrated for the sake of his own immortality. Any of this ring a bell? He said. He told me it was all lies. You've always known when I was lying. I always hated that about you, said Renato. The rebellion had started after atrocities that the Empire hushed up. Renato had rescued a priest whose order had been massacred for one book. He had slept in a burnt village. Dead kittens and puppies had come to tell him what the Emperor had done to them.
anyone put his slinky collection in a strongbox, thought Reynardo. Any magic slinkies?
Oh, don't you think I'd know if my father started practicing black magic?
Why? Would you join in?
No, I'd destroy his books and I'd...
Oh, God. Okay, you're not completely wrong. They've resurrected one of his victims. Well, I mean, look, it's not exactly alive, but it can talk. A true witness, she said. Building these platforms was so expensive, they'd run out of budget for guardrails. God, it's full of stars. The observatory was a burning hulk. Dead scientists and black feathers everywhere. The Ravens had taken special care to burn the reanimated witness to cinders. Zenobia stared at the carnage. He didn't want me to hear the witness, did he? I guess not. What's your plan? She asked. So, Reynardo explained his brilliant gambit. Sending Lapino to get the Iblis Stone, become super powerful and corrupted, provoke the Emperor into using the core against him, thus blowing up both of them, and hopefully the fleet too. Let me visit your council, she said, shaken. I want to help. Could he really trust her?